people who are predators or who are traffickers, they know their victim.
It's one of those things that people hear about, but they don't really get the deets.
I think, like Tina was saying, I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what it is and confusing it with other things and seeing movies and not really hearing from people who are actually working with these people who are victims of human trafficking. And I think that's what we need to hear. We need to hear from the people who work with them and how we can help. And because I think, what was it? Polaris had a statistic that human trafficking went up 25% in 2018.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yes.
That's a high percentage jump, you know?
And, so that was what I wanted to ask you about. It went up 25%.
Yeah.
Is that just America or is that all over the world?
So with Polaris, as we kind of go through the podcast, I'm going to share different resources that if you want to know more about human trafficking and sex trafficking, and these are resources that I trust and that I feel give some of the best kind of comprehensive information, but as well as it's easy for everyone to understand, whether you work in a nonprofit, whether you're a mom, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a dad, a doctor, so that everyone then can be included, because if not everyone is fighting against this horrible atrocity, then it's not going to stop.
All right, you need it in like a format that everybody can digest easily.
Absolutely, because it's a lot. I mean,
yeah,
like happy Saturday, everyone. Like, here we go. So yeah, and so I just think I think there's a lot of different avenues as to why it's increased. I think a lot is we're a very social savvy, world, and a lot of trafficking takes place through social media. And I always share with people too that people who are predators or who are traffickers, they know their victim. So they know who to look for that's vulnerable. They know who to look for that's marginalized. They know the child who has low self-esteem.
Right.
They are smart. And I hate, and even saying that, it's like they are smart and they know how to exploit and they know how to use psychological warfare and physical abuse. And so I think there's so many factors it's increased. I think it's social media. I think pornography has a lot to do with it. I think that we're an easy access society. We can get on a plane in Atlanta and be in another city in an hour.
You're one click away, as they would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, we have a very highly sexualized culture. It's like if you look from 10 years ago to now, even with movies and music and what's on television, it is so different and it's pushing boundaries. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's increased for so many reasons. And I think too, people are also alone. And if you think about it, social media, we are such a technology saturated society that there is that lack of connection. And there is the lack of social skills and there is a lack of interacting with people. And so when you're alone and you need to have satisfaction, and if you get that through sex or through human contact, then you can pay for it.
Right.
And so I think there's so many factors. And people always say too, they're like, what's the one reason for sex trafficking or human trafficking? It is such a complex being that it's not just one thing.
It's always so evolving,
many factors.
Right?
Absolutely.
And it's so funny that you say that, because it's like there are literally apps and websites that are directed at people like, oh, you don't get out a lot, you can use this app or this website to get in touch with people.
Absolutely.
When it's like, normally you would just go to
a
bar, maybe and just talk to the
you can go to Tinder, right or left.
Yeah, right, left. There you go.
Like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure.
Well, I mean,
I'm like, so sorry. And plus too, I think a lot of like you've got Backpage.
.com, you hear about that,
and you've got Craigslist, and it's like there's a lot of big companies that also, whether they want to admit it or not, they are feeding into sexual exploitation.
That's what amazes me. Like, Facebook, like social media and stuff like that. It's like they don't, obviously, they're so big that they just can't say, hey, we've got to lock this down because it would just take millions of dollars. But it's so crazy how people are so blatant that they would just say, hey, we're going to post this on social media and we don't care.
Right.
And nothing happens. And it's just, I really am glad that you've come here to let us know, like, hey, it's not just like all secrets and alleys and stuff. It's right in your face.
Absolutely.
Things you see, you might see them every day, not realize it, but it's there.
And I also tell parents too, it's like if you have a child or a child that you have custody of, if you're a foster parent, like if you are a biological parent, like if your child is on social media, you have to be social media savvy with them. So you have to have the conversations. There has to be boundaries. There needs to be a dialogue to where if something goes on, your child feels safe and they can come and talk to you and say, hey, this guy messaged me. I don't know what this is about, because kids are so vulnerable.
He wants to bring me pizza and beer, and I don't understand.
Absolutely. And so it's like I always share with parents, like it is an awkward conversation. It is uncomfortable. And it's like if you feel that your child is ready to have that conversation, if they're ready to be on social media, it is a responsibility. And as a parent and myself as an aunt and as a godmother, it's my responsibility to ensure that the children in my life are safe.
Well, think about
And
it.
so it's having that open dialogue, even though it's like so painful and so awkward, but in the end, your child then is going to be empowered.
Right.
And they are, instead of living in this state of fear or unknown, they're going to feel empowered. And then there's this open dialogue to where you can have with your child about social media that then can lead to other serious topics that are able to talk about, whether it's suicide, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, self-harm. Then you open that dialogue and that they know, okay, I can come to my mom, my dad, my grandmother, my aunt, my guardian, and have these conversations.
Right.
And which is amazing, because then it's like, okay, now there's that awareness. And now they know how, okay, here's how I can be empowered. And this is what I can do.
I can talk to them.
Yeah. And they need to be able to talk to their parents, because if something gets sent to them and they feel like, oh, I'm going to be in trouble because this person sent me this inappropriate content and they're asking me for something inappropriate, then they're going to think, if they can't come to you, I'm going to be in trouble.
Right.
And that's where the manipulation starts.
Absolutely.
It's like they feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And what's weird too is, when we were kids, it's like that was never a talk your mom had with you.
Right.
It's like, hey, when you get on Facebook, you're like, back when we were kids, like there was no internet.
You wrote letters.
Right.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, don't write letters to weird people.
Right.
But like now it's like, hey, when you get on Facebook, you need to be careful about
Right.
talking to people. And they're like, it's so weird how we have that shift.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like eventually it doesn't matter who you are or where you live or, whether you're black, white, Asian, doesn't matter. You're going to have that talk with your kids eventually. Like when you get on Facebook or Craigslist or, Tumblr or whatever the heck you're doing, like eventually you're going to run into something weird.
Well, you have to talk to them about it too, even before then, because if you don't and you're not,
they need to be prepared for it.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, I think and some of the information you sent, most of the time, it's people you know.
Yeah.
It's people you know. It's not a stranger. It's somebody you know.
That's shocking. That's
who
what shocks me.
hurts you, manipulates you, or even sells you. And, how do you approach that? Because these are adults. You're supposed to be trusting them.
Right.
I mean, and that's what we teach our kids. Trust these adults. These people are supposed to love you. And how confusing is that for a child? This person is supposed to love me, but here they are, and they're hurting me, and they're using me, and they're doing all kinds of terrible things.
Absolutely.
And I think that because you're like, oh, this person is your family, and they love you, they're like, oh, it must be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they feel like they're going to get in trouble.
Right. Because they're like, oh, I have been taught that this is bad.
Right.
But like, I must be doing something wrong.
And a child too, developmentally, depending on where they are at, cognitively, psychosocially, emotionally,
right,
they're not ready to handle something that is horrific, such as sexual abuse, because mentally and emotionally, they're not even up in order to process it.
Right.
And so it's the thing of where I always share with parents, be proactive versus reactive. With aunts, like I'm an aunt and a godmother, try to be proactive versus reactive. Of course, respect the child's age, their developmental, where they're sitting in that kind of that developmental stage through their life, and go to resources and chat with people. Like if you're involved in a faith community, like chat with your pastor. If you go to a temple, like chat with people there, chat with other parents, look up resources, because parenting is so scary. Like, and it's so overwhelming, and like being an aunt and a godmother is scary and so overwhelming, but it's like, okay, what can I do to best not only protect and ensure safety in the child's life, but to empower them? Because it's like, it's that gray line of where you want to have the conversation, but then you never want to have it too soon. as well. So it's like I always share with parents, like, you know your kid best. You know what they can handle and what they can't, but also too, like, look into development, like start learning about child development. What does that look like? How does that moral development work and cognitively? And then you able compare that together. And as well too, like, my faith for me is very important. And it's also like, okay, God, like, where are you leading?
Right.
If your spiritual journey is important to you, it's tapping into that as well, because it has to be a fully holistic approach, because we're full human beings.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
We're fallible.
Absolutely. And it's hard. Like, no one wants to have the conversation. It's like having the conversation about sex. You don't want to have that with your kid, but like, you got to.
Yeah.
And
Like,
the birds and the bees.
You're like, great.